Hey everyone, my name is KARMAAA, and today it was announced that TSM, XTSM, or TQM as you may call them, have found their new org, and this org's name is Astralis. Now, this org's name actually derives from the Latin word star, which is of course Astralis directly, but that is also a derivative of the Greek word astronomia, which of course means star or the sky or astronomy. Now, what's so important about this org is not because it's actually a new org that you probably haven't heard of before, but it's actually important because the players themselves created the org, and they actually own a shared partnership in it with some investors. Now, the players actually created the org by getting the backing of some investors, and by doing so, they've made really history in CSGO, which is basically stepping beyond the boundary of taking an unfair contract from some well-established or already established org. And they did this because they want to get terms in a contract that they feel as players is fair. And no other players in CSGO have really done this, but I mean, when you think about it, it's actually such a genius plan. Not only can you manage yourself and create your own terms, but you also basically have no one above you that can tell you that you're doing the wrong thing or that you have to fulfill certain obligations that you wouldn't want to do. So you may be wondering, why exactly did they actually do this? Well, there's a number of reasons. I already stated some, but I'll summarize some of them for you right now. So the first reason is because the players felt by creating their own brand, they would play their best and represent the brand that they have created in order to make that brand more valuable. Now, Device said this in an interview, and he stated, owning a part of the brand makes us motivated to do better as players, since that directly affects the value of our new company. Now, while this is true, the biggest and best teams in the world, of course, usually have the most screen time and are mentioned probably the most in terms of forums and on Reddit and just in general within the actual esports scene. And I think it's just notable for you to understand that the players clearly themselves are self-aware that their value actually makes the org valuable rather than the other way around. So instead of you actually joining a very established kind of org like they did with TSM, that didn't actually make them more valuable players. It was more so the other way around. If you do better and you actually pump that brand's name out there through your results, you actually make that brand more valuable. So it's actually important for you to understand that the players are self-aware of this, and as a result, they've used that to make their own brand in order to make it more valuable. Now, this all relies on them basically doing well this year. So I hope that they can actually achieve this goal and possibly even increase their salaries, and we'll talk about salaries a little bit later on. Now, the second reason is about length of contracts. Now, I've done contract law at university, I've passed it successfully, and well, just about any contract has some length of time. That is, of course, unless you're dealing with a machinima contract, but that's a completely different video. Regardless, I mean, the players were only offered contracts from other orgs for about 1 year or even shorter. So yeah, in terms of looking at them actually wanting longer contracts, this is a way for them to secure that. Now, usually these contracts that they get from other orgs, state, we'll give you 6 months, and then if you guys get really good results or you fulfill a certain obligation, then there's a promise within the contract for another contract that extends your basic time at this organization. Now, I guess Zipnik's kind of talked about this, and he stated that mainly they got short-term offers, i.e. for the rest of 2016, and players are in general very unsure about what their future holds. So with them creating their own org, they have basically secured possibly longer contracts for themselves, thus allowing for more financial security whilst they want to continue to play, but also the ability to hold some sort of value. And they can hold this value even after they've left the team. And they do this by earning revenue still through the org, because obviously if they own part of the org and they own a share within the organization, then they'll continue to get revenue through that organization as long as it's obviously still alive and earning revenue. Now, actually, the last couple of reasons relate to the organization, well, their former organization, TSM, directly. Now, bear in mind, I believe that TSM is one of, and is still one of the best orgs in esports. They have a very solid reputation, and, I believe that they're one of the biggest brands in esports, especially League of Legends. But perhaps the League of Legends part of their organization affected some of their CSGO decisions, and as a result, this has actually affected the players in their creation of Astralis. Now, one thing TSM had was a huge problem with communicating with the team due to time zone differences. Now, this is a bit weird, but I'm guessing it is a complication. I'm not exactly sure how, because I'm not obviously Device or ZipX, and, I haven't been talking between the orgs directly. But because TSM is based in the USA and the actual team was in Northern Europe, in either Denmark or at least in Scandinavia, then I would just assume that it would be hard to arrange certain appointments and meetings between managers, players, and staff. So if you needed to have a particular time, you'd have to free up that time. Meetings would have to be arranged quite heavily in advance. And I just wanted to say that this is probably a problem on both ends. I'm not saying it's all TSM's fault, because obviously if the players say, I'm doing this and I'm busy doing this and blah, 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 then TSM will just turn around and say, well, we're the ones paying you, should be making time for us. And they might say, well, I'm sleeping at this particular time, or, I've got some particular hobby that I need to do, or that's not a very good time, or, it's just basically really hard to do that. Sometimes it's even national holidays too. So I guess in the end, the cultural difference is one thing, but also the time zone difference made it a bit hard. So in order to solve and resolve this problem, they created their own org, hired their own staff in Denmark, and basically did it in order to have good communication between the players and their staff. So Zipnix really noted this in the interview by stating that they're in very close dialogue with their owners, so I'm guessing the investors, and that makes part of their everyday life much easier. We are also able to influence decisions on potential partnerships, and we now have legally binding contracts. So as you can see, that time zone difference directly has made them want to have an organization that's in the same time zone as them and has the same culture. And as a result, that makes their everyday lives much easier. But more so, I feel this kind of issue relates to their team manager, really. So during their time at TSM, their manager at one point stopped being paid by the org. And I suspect this is because the org no longer felt he was useful to them. Either that, or maybe he wasn't fulfilling particular obligations that were contractual, implied, or discussed. So either way, I feel this is TSM's fault, really, as in CS, and at least in CSGO, the manager of a team is really an important role, as they mainly take care of the players. So they can do this in a number of ways. They might wake them up in times for matches. They might make sure they catch correct flights. They get them food and drinks. And in general, they just look out for them, make sure that some rabid fan maybe doesn't attack them, or, they're on time for games and they're in the right place at the right time. And someone's watching them all the time, basically, to make sure they can do their particular job. Now, in League of Legends, a manager takes on more of a coach role where, they actually create tactics, employ strategies, and they also take care of the players. But in League of Legends, this role is kind of monetarily subsidized by Riot. And as a result, I guess TSM, the organization, didn't see it fit to pay someone any longer to be their manager, either because they felt like he wasn't doing what they thought or what they expected. But I think it's interesting to note that CSGO is a different game, and the players took money out of their own salary to pay for their manager's own salary and for his flights and etc. towards the end of their TSM contract. So this, I feel, was really a big reason as to why the players created Astralis, so they could mainly fund and pay for their manager, or even his successor, which I think is Zonic now, but maybe they still have their old manager. And because of that, they actually understand that the manager is of great importance to themselves. He does a particular role that they feel is not redundant. Now, the other last reason I think is pretty obvious, which is gear and sponsorships. So sometimes when you sign up to an org, say like Cloud9 for instance, they're sponsored by Logitech. And that means that you got to use Logitech gear, or at least advertise it. Now, it would look really bad in terms of advertising if you as a player didn't particularly like a piece of gear, or even the company behind the gear. And in that circumstance, it makes it really hard for you to actually promote the gear and advertise it. So I guess, yeah, the main reason is because they want to plug gear or advertise gear that they like. And ZipX stated again in the interview that when a player wants to use a product, it's 100 times easier for them to advertise than when a player doesn't like the product that he's using. And this could also hinder performance, which eventually could cost championships. So effectively, now they can pick and choose what gear they want to use, and particularly what sponsors and partnerships they want to have. And I guess because of a particular set of gear that the players used in either TSM or possibly even Dignitas, the players felt shortchanged in some way, and they felt like their results were poorer, or they couldn't actually like a particular product. But now they can plug whatever gear they want, use whatever gear they want, and have what sponsorships they want. And as a result, they can just focus on playing the game. Now, the most interesting part of all of this is really the salary of the players. And in this interview, the players talked about money and how this influenced them in creating Astralis. So the most interesting point is that the players said that they knocked back offers higher than their current salaries with Astralis. And it was either because of the reasons that I stated above, or because of some other ulterior motive that they didn't particularly say in the interview, but I'm just going to say that it's probably because of the reasons that they stated above. Now, these offers were as high as $10,000 per month per player. And this also included 100% sticker money and skin money. So let's do a little math. Now, if you get $10,000 per month, obviously times that by 12, it's $120,000 a year. And I'm going to assume that this is in American dollars when they're talking. Now, they're not totally crazy by knocking back this offer, as they did currently state their current salaries, which is around about $9,000 per month per player, so about $108,000 per annum, and with a increase over time within their contract, then they can also possibly reach that $10,000 if they secure some sort of sponsorship or partnership that's, going to lead to them having more money. Now, not only is this an insight into the amount of money that players are receiving, but it's also important to note that players' salaries have increased since the last year. So I'm going to leave a link in the description to a Richard Lewis article, which basically states that when TSM signed their contracts, they were earning around about $3,000 per month. Now, since I think they signed it in January last year, 2015, since a year, they've actually increased their salaries 3 times. So as a result, it's really great to see that players have not only increased their actual playing ability in terms of, they got over choking and they actually won their first tournament last year, but they also increased their salaries. And, it's important to note that they didn't just make up this salary, There were organizations that were willing to offer them more money. So I think the scene in general, and at least in CSGO, salaries have increased to, I would have to say, quite an amount. But you may be asking, why not take the $10,000 and sign with another org? I mean, why continue to create your own? Well, like I said, you create an investment for yourself after you leave the team. And if, for example, you leave the team and the org survives, you still earn that revenue. Or some sort of revenue. But really, I think Zipnik's kind of gave us the true reasoning. And he stated that with all due respect to a lot of organizations and their owners, some players are getting screwed. Many of us players, including myself, are young and we don't fully grasp what our worth is. He continued by saying, but if an owner of an org cuts corners in regards to the players and their conditions to take a larger piece of the pie, I'd personally be furious. Now, I believe he was actually talking about how TSM kind of screwed over their manager in one way or another in order for them to actually earn more money. Now, I'm not saying that, that's directly what TSM did, but I mean, to a certain extent, by obviously not paying their manager, then their conditions as players would obviously go down because they'd have to either manage themselves or they'd be subsidizing him through their salary, which is what ended up happening. So I'm not saying maybe TSM did it in order to make more money, but possibly within the budget that they had coming into the new financial year, they couldn't afford him anymore. And as a result, they had to drop him. So in the end, Astralis, I feel, was created because the players were either feeling that they were shortchanged by particular orgs, either via communication or monetarily, but also through the treatment towards themselves and their manager and any staff that they're associated with. So in order to solve this problem, they created their own dedicated CSGO org that understands CSGO problems. They make decisions, and because they're CSGO players, they obviously make decisions that matter to CSGO, not to League of Legends or any other main game that, the organization is associated with. So I guess in the end, they made themselves their own bosses, kind of, or at least they get a vote in what they do want to do and what they don't want to do with the investors. So yeah, they actually have a share in the company and they can vote on particular things in board meetings. Now, in terms of what we should expect from this team coming into 2016, well, with that kind of money, I mean, they should continue to be in the top 3 teams in the world. Maybe even rise to becoming the best team in the world for a period of time, like they did last year, but for a much longer period of time. I'm talking at least maybe 4 months. And of course, I think their big goal this year is, of course, winning a major. So if you'd like to know more about Astralis, I'll leave a link in the description to the interview with Device and Zipniks, where I got most of the information from for this video. If you liked the video, guys, like it, subscribe to me. I have a Patreon, link is also in the description, so if you want to help me making more videos, and I guess I'll catch you guys next time.